The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Sunday without the Commanders. I don't know, just seems a little bit empty. But things are setting up in a very interesting way. Despite the back-to-back losses, despite the hand-wringing over, maybe they've hit the wall, maybe they overachieved in the first half. Look at the odds, not just for tonight, where the Cowboys at home are 7-point underdogs against Houston, but the odds are already out for the Sunday game here against Dallas, and the Commanders are favored by 10 points. 10 points, that's a home game, but seems like a lot. And look, they've got 7 wins banked. 2 more, I think they get in. 3, they certainly do. And 4 more, 4 out of 6, which may be asking a lot. 4 out of 6, they get to 11 for the first time since they won the Super Bowl in 1991. So, I don't know. It's a strange feel. It really is. And watching the other games this weekend, with all the kicking problems that they had in the early part of the season, and even though Austin Seibert is hurt right now, Zane Gonzalez has done a good job filling in, and around the league, including in Baltimore, where you have the greatest of all time in Justin Tucker, field goals and extra points really hurt teams yesterday, really just anecdotally. I don't have the full numbers, but you just watch the games as I did on the Red Zone channel. 7 hours of commercial-free football, and you just see one doink after another, and it looked like Chicago did everything they needed to do to beat Green Bay. Maybe that would have been a game that kept them in the playoff hunt, barely. But they lost the game because a makeable field goal, a 43-yard field goal at the gun, was blocked. And I thought Caleb Williams did an excellent job of getting him down the field, setting it up. For whatever reason, Matt Eberflus elected to run the clock down rather than try and pick up extra yardage to get a little bit closer than 43 yards. And everything he did up to that point looked good enough to win the game. And nowadays, a 43-yarder is pretty much a chip shot, but the field goal was blocked, and that's how the game ended. We'll get to the problems that the Ravens had yesterday. It wasn't just missed field goals. They just didn't score enough, and they held Pittsburgh to 6 field goals. They kept Pittsburgh out of the end zone, but too many self-inflicted penalties. And for a team that came into this season looking like they might finally get over the hump and might be the team that would knock off Kansas City and get to the Super Bowl from the AFC, I mean, right now, you'd have to put them probably at 4. Whether you want to rank Buffalo number 1 off their win over Kansas City yesterday, or want to keep the Chiefs at 1 with the best record in football at 9-1, that's going to be probably a matchup we're going to see down the road, if not in the AFC Championship game, maybe before. We're going to see them again, probably. But with the way Pittsburgh beat Baltimore yesterday and the way they've been coming with Russell Wilson, I think you put them number 4 in the AFC. That you've got whatever order, Kansas City, Buffalo, then Pittsburgh, and then Baltimore. And for a team that had everything set up last year where they hosted the AFC Championship game and lost that game, learning experience, whatever you want to call it, it looked like they were poised to get back again and maybe beat Kansas City this time. I don't know. And even, they've got the number 1 scoring offense in the NFL. The number 1 scoring offense should have been able to get more than 16 points against Pittsburgh, but they didn't do it. And you have, MVP conversation again. They're talking MVP 3 for Lamar Jackson, and he may win it, but the team itself, something's not right there. Something is wrong, and we'll get to that. Meantime, look, I'll be honest with you about hockey. I watch very little regular season hockey. When the Caps are in the playoffs, I watch almost all their games, if not all the games, every minute. And their run to the Stanley Cup in 2018 was thrilling. And what followed was even more amazing, as they had a week-long celebration with Alex Ovechkin and the Cup as they traveled all around town, just partying with everybody. And, it was just a great, great week of celebration. And we hadn't had the Nats win yet, so it'd been a long time since anybody in town had won a championship. You had to go back to the Redskins in '92, so that was really incredible. But the things have tailed off. They've gone through several coaches, and now Spencer Carberry is the coach. And Here's what I thought going into it. Now, I probably could have been talked out of it by somebody who actually knew something about hockey, but I looked at their situation and said, man, this is tough because you got to get Alex Ovechkin the record. And you're going to do it with a team that you're trying to rebuild at the same time. You know, they've gotten older, injuries, you know, things that they could have controlled by, not signing these long-term contracts, but it was about keeping Ovechkin happy, getting Ovechkin the record, the Wayne Gretzky record, and also trying to be competitive at the same time. Well, this looked like a rebuild with the record chase kind of being at odds with it. And I thought, this is going to be an absolute mess. They're trying to get Ovechkin the record as quickly as they can. They don't want this to linger like 3 years. And they also want to be filling in for some of the older players who are being replaced. And I am just stunned with what's happened so far because not only are they winning, they're 12-4-1, but Ovechkin is on a pace where it's no longer a question of if he's going to break the record this year, assuming he stays healthy, but when he's going to do it. And he went into the year needing 42 to break the record. He's now at 29, and last night had a hat trick. Had a hat trick in a place where, yes, there are some incredible memories. That's where they won the Stanley Cup in 2018, but they had never won a regular season game in that building. They were 0-5-1, the 6 regular season games that they had played in Vegas since Vegas came into the league as an expansion team, and they were an expansion team the year that the Capitals beat them for the Stanley Cup. They never won there. So they win there last night with the hat trick from Ovechkin, 5-2, and they're in the midst of a brutal road trip because they played in Colorado Friday. They're playing in Vegas last night, and they got another one back-to-back at Utah tonight. But it's a hell of a start to the trip after just a disappointing game that they played against Toronto. Right before they left last week, they had a 2-goal lead on Toronto with about 4 minutes to go. They blew the lead, and Toronto won the game in overtime. And Spencer Carberry, who's had kid gloves and the way he's treated this team, kind of lit them up. Very disappointed in the way they played. But they get back on the road and win these 2 back-to-back games. Things are pointing in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a great start. I mean, the win in Colorado, and then here we've never won as an organization a regular season game in this building. So, and we knew it was going to be a challenge, and I give our guys a ton of credit for yesterday. We sort of took a day away from the rink and really wanted to focus on our physical and mental prep because we knew how difficult it is to have success in this building. And so a lot of credit to our guys for, reset, refocus. Let's use the day to mentally and physically reset and then come out here and be able to perform in, a place we've never won a hockey game in. So we'll take it and move on to Utah.
Yeah, and that kind of even surprised Ovechkin. He didn't realize that they hadn't won in Vegas before.
Carlos just said, it was the first regulation win here in Vegas. So, yeah, it was pretty cool atmosphere, like always, I think we play hard. LT do unbelievable job. Everybody blocking the shots, everybody sacrificed their body. So, yeah, we take it and move on.
Yeah, and an emotional night too for the goaltender for the Caps, Logan Thompson, who came here as a free agent in the offseason. First game back in Vegas, and he stopped 40 of the 42 shots as they sweep the season series. They'd beaten Vegas earlier this year at home. So, again, I got to give a lot of credit to Carberry here. A young coach, and he's navigating what is a tough thing to do. It's tough to have a young rebuilding team with a legend who they certainly want to get the record, and I thought it might be a 2-year process off of last year when he had that terribly slow start. It looked like, oh, man, he's jumped the shark, and now what are they going to do? They got to get him all these goals for a guy who may not have enough left in the tank. Well, clearly he's got enough left in the tank. He's 39 years old, and he's playing at an unbelievable level. He's, in fact, playing like his 39-year-old maybe equal or mirror in basketball. LeBron is lighting it up, too, at 39. Partly maybe because he's fired up to play with his son, but he's also going through a stretch here where he's unstoppable. He's not the physical specimen he was 15 years ago, but he's adjusted his game. He's hitting more threes, and on a Laker team that's kind of up and down, he's been really, really consistent and good, and we'll get to him in the next hour. Meantime, the Ravens situation. And remember the years, you probably wouldn't remember if you're not old enough, but back in the 70s and the 80s, when the NFL Today was the pregame show with Brent Musburger and Phyllis George and later Jane Kennedy and Jimmy the Greek and Irv Cross. That was, and I don't even know what was on NBC, but that's what everybody watched, the NFL Today, and it was a half hour. And although gambling was not legal, Pete Rozelle had a great understanding of what gambling meant to the game. So he had kind of a wink-wink, nod-nod situation, and he was the one that was fully in favor of Jimmy the Greek being added to the set because, you know, the Greek was the one who supposedly set the odds when the Colts lost to the Jets in Super Bowl III, that he made Baltimore an 18-point favorite, which only enhanced the legend of Joe Namath. So he was on the set, and while he couldn't give the point spreads, he had a checklist. And he would put 5 or 6 items for both teams, and he would give a check to the team that had the edge, offensive line, running back, quarterback, whatever, and then they get the kicking game. Well, in this case, you got the Ravens facing the Steelers, and you'd have to say that you'd give a check mark for kicking because you got Justin Tucker, who is still the most accurate kicker in the history of the NFL. He will go to the Hall of Fame someday. He's got the longest field goal in NFL history, 66 yards. I mean, he has been, at least in my mind, the biggest kicking advantage that any team has had in the NFL over the past decade. But he struggled. He struggled lately. He struggled at the end of last year, and he has struggled this year and may have cost them the game yesterday with 2 missed field goals of relatively short distance. I mean, one of them I think was 50 yards, but for him, that's a chip shot, and he missed both of them. And while John Harbaugh doesn't sound like he's getting ready to make a change, there was actually no spirited defense for his kicker in the postgame after they lost in Pittsburgh yesterday.
Tuck needs to make kicks. He knows that. That's important. He makes them in practice, and he made the long one later, which is good to see, which means he's still very capable of it. Kick him straight. We'll be good.
Yeah, kick him straight. We'll be good. But he may be faced with, and I think you got to let it go, maybe another game or two. But if he's got what some call Steve Blass disease, Steve Blass was a pitcher for the Pirates in the 70s who was great, and then somehow just lost it. Couldn't find the plate anymore. Tucker may not be in that spot anymore, but when you used to go, okay, time to go to the bathroom, he's going to make a kick, that's not the case anymore. Now, he's a very interesting guy. He's not going to be hurting for a second career when he leaves kicking. He's one of the top opera singers in the United States, so he could do that. And he's very analytical about what he does and does face the media after games. He never seems to lose his cool. So this is how some of the postgame went after what was a crushing performance where, if he makes those 2 field goals, the game plays out differently, and maybe the Ravens hold on and win.
I'd like to make it a point not to make the same mistake twice, let alone once. We did make that adjustment moving into our next opportunities in the game.
Chris Horton said earlier this week, every kick is its own kick. But do these misses linger one over another? Are you able to kind of compartmentalize and make every kick its own kick?
I think that's part of the challenge of playing this position is you have to go out there and make each kick its own kick. So compartmentalizing, what happened on one kick that didn't go through and putting it away so you can go and make the most for your next opportunity, that's a challenge. And that's not necessarily a easy thing to do. I still remember misses that I had 12 years ago. And I, will wake up at night thinking about one that got away. But that's just the nature of playing this position is you have to treat each one like its own kick. So the first 2 that I missed today, I was still trying to make it a point to do just that, treat each kick for what it's worth. Ultimately just decided to make a slight adjustment moving forward for the remaining opportunities that we would have for the rest of the day. I just made it a point, communicated with Nick and Jordan, hey, I'm going to pick a target line that's going to be more right third of the uprights, and we're just going to just smash the ball and go from there. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, remember the AFC Championship game last year where Travis Kelce got into it with them because he was kicking at their end of the field? That may have been planned on the part of Kelce. He may have known that that's the spot that Justin Tucker liked to warm up in, but knowing he might be able to get inside his head, he messed with him a little bit. And that's what happens to kickers. Kickers go bad. How many kickers do you know that have a great year and say, that's it, I'm going to retire? They hang on as long as they can. As great as Mark Mosley was here, and he's the only kicker ever to win the MVP, after Joe Theismann broke his leg in 1985, and Theismann had been his holder for most of the time he kicked in Washington, he started to tail off a little bit. And it broke Joe Gibbs' heart, I'm sure, to do it. But in the 86 season, early on, he had to cut him. He wound up finishing up his career with the Cleveland Browns, but there really wasn't much interest in him anymore. And Tucker may be reaching that point. Who knows? Maybe it's just a slump that he's in. He's got to work on a few mechanics and he gets over it. But that's got to be a concern for the Ravens. You don't want to blow a chance in a year where you're expected to make a run at the Super Bowl, blow it because your kicker, who was the greatest ever, suddenly isn't any good anymore. They've got other problems, too, and he wasn't the sole reason they lost yesterday. They had a bunch of penalties. They had turnovers, and they talked to Lamar Jackson after the game yesterday, and he said that they are their biggest enemy. He says it's been that way ever since last year, I believe, going back to the AFC Championship, where we killed ourselves. Chiefs game, the opener, we killed ourselves. Raiders, we killed ourselves. And today, it's the same thing. We can't be beating ourselves in these type of games. We've got to find a way to fix it. That S is annoying. They do have the top scoring offense in the league. But, again, the problems yesterday, Derrick Henry fumbled on the second play of the game. Chris Boswell kicked a field goal. They were up 7-6 late in the first half, deep in their own territory. They decided to be aggressive instead of taking a knee and going into the half with the lead. The Ravens fumbled again. Boswell kicked a field goal, so now they're behind 10-6 instead of 9-7 instead of ahead 7-6. They're down 15-10 in the fourth quarter. Ravens made a big play when Marlon Humphrey picked off Russell Wilson in the end zone, and then Jackson sprinted 25 yards on the next play, and the Ravens appeared, okay, like this is fine. We're going to be rolling. But the next play, 15-yard completion from Jackson to Henry on a screen was wiped out after a lineman was penalized for being illegally downfield. Then he went deep on the next play and was picked off by Steelers rookie linebacker Peyton Wilson, which set up the game-winning field goal. And then they were forced to go for two after they scored a touchdown, and it didn't work out. I mean, it was a terrible play. Like Lamar was rolling out to his left, I guess looking for an open receiver, couldn't find one, pushed out of bounds. So they got problems. They're 7-4. And who'd have thought, even though the Commanders have lost two in a row, but who'd have thought we'd be on the 18th of November and there seems to be more concerns about the postseason for the Baltimore Ravens than the Washington Commanders. Kind of amazing how that's worked out. College football. Remember when Ed Orgeron was fired at LSU, and he had, as a coach, I think maybe the greatest college team of all time. The Joe Burrow team of 2019, that 2019 season, that may be the best season in the history of college football, and he was unbelievable. And then LSU fell on hard times. They fired Coach O, and the narrative was, well, if Orgeron can win a championship at LSU, anybody can. They paid Brian Kelly $100 million, and he had, as we're finding out, an outstanding quarterback in Jaden Daniels the last 2 years, didn't sniff a run at the playoff. And now, after losing at a Florida team where they want to fire the coach and it's been a disastrous season, what do you make now of Brian Kelly? We'll get to that mess and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So when LSU won the championship with Joe Burrow as a senior in 2019, Ed Orgeron was seen as kind of a cartoonish guy, but a great personality. Maybe he built the team of the strength of his personality. He had that voice like this, and go Tigers, go Tigers. And then they started to lose, and Ed Orgeron suddenly became a buffoon. And they thought, well, look at this guy. If he could win at LSU, anybody can go in there and win. So LSU, and if I've never been there, but I've heard stories for 40 years about how that is the greatest environment ever in college football for a night game. Like, they have 100,000 people who don't have tickets who show up. They just show up for the party, and they watch the game in the parking lot. It's wild. And the expectation is you compete for national championships every year. So they figure we're going to spare no expense. We're going to get the guy who's built a really good program at Notre Dame. Notre Dame had gone into the dumper under Charlie Weiss, who's, I think, one of the biggest frauds ever in coaching. He benefited from coaching Tom Brady and cheating with Spygate. And that got him an opportunity at Notre Dame, and he was terrible. He was terrible at Notre Dame. He left Notre Dame with a big pouch of money and buyout and went to Kansas and did the same thing. He collected a lot of money to be a lousy coach for a long time. Brian Kelly came in, made him respectable, got him to the championship game. This is before the playoff, but they got their doors blown off by Alabama. It's 2012, I believe, which, showed that they weren't really in that class. But, doing a good job at Notre Dame. Okay, LSU figures it's a lot different here in the Bayou because you got a lot of restrictions at Notre Dame with academics and so forth, and we don't have those here in the Bayou, so we're going to bring in Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly comes in, and he puts on this phony baloney accent, this southern accent, and then he says, no, actually, I'm from Boston. It sounds like Boston. No, it doesn't sound like Boston. And he's proving to be quite a fraud. And over the weekend, not that they had really any chance to be in the 12-team playoff, but they were ranked 22 in the top 25 for that. They had lost 3 games, so they were 8-3, and they're playing a Florida team, which is a mess. Billy Napier is on the hot seat. Florida had guaranteed he was coming back, but they had dropped 8 in a row against ranked opponents. They were 1-10 in rivalry games. And in comes LSU figuring, okay, this is a get-right kind of game against a reeling Florida team. Well, they not only lost the game, they lost the game soundly, 27-16. And it was the Gators' first victory in the series since 2018 when Joe Burrow was a junior. Didn't quite reach the level that he did as a senior. And Kelly was seen yelling at his players on the sideline earlier this year after a loss. He slammed his fist on the table, how frustrated he is. And so now he's trying to get more involved with what's going on. And after this loss, was asked, what's your involvement here now that this team has lost again and scored only 16 points?
It seems like today you were holding your play sheet more regularly throughout the game than you maybe normally do. Were you more involved in the offense in this game than you have been in the past?
Well, I think when things don't go well, the head coach has got to be involved. And that's not to say that I don't have full faith and trust in my staff. I do. But the buck stops with me. When we lose a game, I have to be able to look at the reasons why. And quite frankly, I feel as though in my background and how I was developed as a coach, I feel like it's get involved. And so, yes, I've been more involved in everything that we're doing.
Yeah, that's a nice phrase that you took from Harry Truman, the buck stops with me, but it really doesn't because of the way these contracts are set up. Now, not that LSU couldn't afford the buyout. We've already seen Jimbo Fisher bought out by the alums at Texas A&M, $76 million. Maybe they do the same thing with Kelly. I don't know. But he's got 7 years left on this $100 million deal. You just going to write a check for that? So the buck doesn't really stop with you. The buck stops with, whatever you decide to do and getting rid of staff to preserve your butt. And now you're saying to your players who you were seen openly yelling at and arguing with on the sidelines, and some lip readers came up with some things that aren't very becoming of him, and it's generally, underachieved. Especially he got what clearly is the best quarterback. He had Jaden Daniels for 2 years. Jaden Daniels for 2 years with Daniels winning the Heisman Trophy this past year, and they didn't contend. And so now he's got a team that is not going to be in the playoff. And, yeah, with 8 wins, you're looking to get to some kind of a bowl, but the bowls outside of the playoff don't mean anything anymore, and nobody plays in them because they're all getting ready for the NFL draft. But here he's trying to motivate a team which now looks dead in the water.
This is really a simple exercise of, do you want to fight or not? You know, do you want to fight and take responsibility as coaches and players that we're not playing well and we're struggling right now? So it's life. It's a myriad of things, but it's a reflection of what life's about. There's a rough spot here that we have to fight through, and we got to do it together. So if you're not a thumb pointer, if you're not somebody that's saying, I'm going to work and continue to work to be better, then we don't have a place for you in the last couple of weeks. But if you want to fight and you want to keep working to get better, then we're going to be alongside of you. But at the end of the day, it's about overcoming adversity and fighting through these last 2 games that are at home that we desperately want to win.
I'm not sure if I were a player for him that I would want to get on board that. He's asking for loyalty there and getting on track for next year. With what's available to players now, they may get their arms around this and come up with a better system, but anybody who's unhappy there can transfer. And with basically 2 meaningless games left to go, do you as a player say, well, I don't want to risk injury here. I'm just going to announce I'm leaving. I'm going to transfer. And who knows what they finish up the season with. This is a disaster. An incredible disaster. This is Paul Feinbaum, who probably knows more about college football than anybody, on his Sunday morning hit with Matt Barry on ESPN on just how bad the situation is.
It's almost indescribable what a hot mess LSU is at the moment. I mean, you see Kelly yelling at players. I'm yelling back at him. You see the Notre Dame fans chirping, especially if they get through the next 2 weeks and make the playoffs. And he is suddenly in a really bad spot because this season has blown up on him. And, he had the number 1 quarterback in the country committed, and now that's about to become a bidding war with Michigan for dollars, of which we have never seen before. And if he doesn't get that guy, I don't know what next year looks like for him.
So, okay, how bad is it in Baton Rouge? They've lost 3 in a row. He was won 10 games each of his first 2 seasons.
It's bad because LSU fans, they have no basement. I mean, they just go from, beating Alabama a week ago to maybe getting to the SEC championship game and the playoffs to now the season is over, and they have a home game next week against Vanderbilt. I doubt the enthusiasm level in the parking lot is going to be it's going to be close to comatose. And then the final game of the year is against Oklahoma, which won't be any better. And Kelly, who I really believe is an elite coach, somehow has just watched this thing blow up on him. A number of injuries happened, and who knows what else. Garrett Nussmeier cannot get out of his own shadow. And I think depending on how this season ends, I mean, Kelly's going to be facing maybe the coldest winter of any SEC coach.
Wow. What does that mean? Coldest winter. I don't think they're going to get rid of him. But, he's asking everybody to get on board. As he said, they got a quarterback who has decommitted and now is going on a bidding war with somebody else. I mean, part of it is the state of college football for sure. But the other part is that the coach is overrated. He had success at Notre Dame. He should have success at Notre Dame. And going to LSU didn't guarantee that you, with different rules and different regulations, although he didn't go there necessarily with the NIL. The NIL has sort of come in about the same time. But he hasn't adapted well. And they're stuck with him. They're stuck with him for a while. And LSU, as Feinbaum said, there's no bottom there. They don't tolerate this. So we'll see how far it goes. I know in recent weeks I've had a spirited defense of Mike Locksley, and I still have that. I know there's a lot of blowback. I see it on Twitter. Get rid of Locksley, get rid of Locksley. Maryland's almost certainly not going to make a bowl game this year. They've got Iowa at home, and then they close with Penn State. They probably won't win either game. They're certainly not going to beat Penn State, and we'll miss a bowl this year for the first time in 4 years. And it's easy to say, well, once they lost Talia Tagovailoa, they're not a very good team, and this, that, and the other. And they've had some really crushing losses. They blew the Michigan State game at home. That was terrible. And losing to Rutgers, that shouldn't happen. They shouldn't lose to Rutgers at College Park. But Rutgers came in and beat them soundly. They beat them 31-17. And Billy Edwards, who's a tough customer, was mainly a running quarterback filling in for Talia past couple of years. He did throw for 335 yards and a touchdown, but he did have an interception, and it was really a kind of a game where they had opportunities, and the defense. I was watching a lot of the game, and there was just one third down conversion after another by Rutgers. They really dominated that game, and so I know there's going to be people saying you got to get rid of Loxley. You got to get rid of Loxley. Well, let's remember what happened here. They had DJ Durkin, who had been an assistant under Jim Harbaugh, kind of a hard-ass guy, and he comes in with his highly paid strength coach, and, there was a terrible, terrible tragedy there. Jordan McNair died because the strength coach didn't recognize that he was having a heat stroke. They didn't have proper facilities to put him into a cold tub, and they embarrassed him in front of his teammates. They dragged him across the field, and his kidneys shut down, and he died a couple of weeks later. And initially, the Board of Regents got together, and they said, well, we're going to keep him because they didn't want to pay off his contract, and then there was big blowback, and they got rid of him. So Loxley, who had been in and out of the school for years. He didn't go there. He went to Towson, but he'd been an assistant coach going back to the early 2000s with Ralph Friedgen. He'd done a hell of a job as a recruiter. He'd gone to Illinois. He loaded up on DMV area players, and they did well. He's an excellent recruiter, and he had undergone a kind of a coaching rehab under Nick Saban. He failed at New Mexico, but he went with Saban, learned a lot of things, and I think has done a really good job. They went to 3 straight bowl games. They won all 3 of them. He's going to miss this year, but he's got some recruits coming in, including this top quarterback who is one of the top ones in the country, and I think you ride it out with them. They don't like to buy out. They don't, I don't think, have the money that Texas A&M and some of these other schools have. He's got 4 years, $24 million left on his contract. If you want to get rid of him, go ahead. But I don't think you're necessarily going to find anybody better to come in here. And I think under the circumstances, he's done a very good job. I know people say, hey, you're full of crap, you're foolish, your expectations are too low, yada, yada, yada. I think what they did the last 3 years is Maryland football. If they can get between 7 and 9 wins a year, I think that's realistic. It really is, because you're never going to be able to create the atmosphere that you got at Penn State, which is just up the road. That's 100,000 people who show up and are rabid football fans and with a great football tradition. You're competing with the likes of, the school you lost to, Rutgers. You're competing with other schools, even though they're not in the ACC anymore. You're going to, get players who might consider like North Carolina and Duke and places like that. But he can talk, and I don't blame him for saying that they can compete for Big Ten championships. You got to set the bar high. But realistically, I don't think they're going to be able to do that. And so you had a down year, and they had a year where things would have gone better. They might have slipped into a bowl game with 6 wins, maybe 7 wins. But they're not going to get it. They're probably going to wind up the season with a 4-8 record, and in the Big Ten wind up 1-8. That's not going to be good enough. That's not acceptable. But it's 1 year. I think if they don't have a good year next year, and you got 3 years left on the contract, then you might think about it. But I don't sense a collapse there. I think he's got a good program going there, and it's a down year, and things didn't go their way. But I definitely would not get rid of him, and I don't think the boosters are going to pony up the kind of cash. When Debbie Yao was there and Ralph Friedgen had a bad year, Ralph had a great run there. He was there for 10 years. They went to 7 bowl games, and they had a 2-win season. And Debbie Yao shopped around. She even went to the governor's office to see if they can come up with a buyout for him, and he wasn't biting on that. So she was forced to keep Ralph another year, and Ralph was coach of the year. He won 9 games. And the new athletic director came in and got rid of him. And, you had a bad situation. Randy Edsall was terrible. Did a terrible, terrible job. So be careful what you wish for. I know I'm getting blowback on Twitter from people who say, you don't know what you're talking about. Your expectations are too low. I'm not getting rid of Mike Loxley if I'm Maryland. Not doing it. Not going to do it. I'm not breaking any news here, but football season is over in New York. Giants are 2-8. As Adam Schefter speculated last week, Daniel Jones appears to have played his last snap for the New York Giants. They are not going to risk injury, in which they'd be on the hook for his contract for next year if he doesn't pass the physical in March. So they're going to sit him down for the rest of the year, and they are turning to Tommy DeVito, who was sort of a sensation for a little while last year, will be the starting quarterback when they play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday. So at 2-8, they're done. Daniel Jones is done in New York. Brian Daboll is coming back as the coach, according to the owner, so we'll see what happens there. But this season is kaput. It's buried, and Tommy DeVito will finish it up with the last 7 games, or as long as he lasts, and they look to next year. Jets, they've been on the brink of being done. Now they are officially done. 3-8 off a loss yesterday to the Indianapolis Colts at home. And on top of everything else, the know-it-all, Mr. Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers, is, publicly second-guessing his coaches, which he can do because they've turned the team over to Aaron Rodgers. So they lose to the Colts yesterday, 28-27. They go up by 7 early in the fourth quarter when he throws a touchdown pass to Kenny Yeboah, 11-yard TD, and they go for 1. So they go up 8, and they wind up losing by 1. Rather than say, that was the call at the time. That's what the coaches did. No. Aaron Rodgers, Mr. Know-It-All, decides after the game, when he had a chance to bring his team back, but got sacked at the end and looking every bit of being 40 years old, soon to be 41 next month. This is what he said about the coach's decision to go for 1 after they scored that fourth quarter touchdown rather than go for 2.
I like going for 2 in that situation when you're 7, can go up 9. The reason I was thinking is we'd had a conversation on the sideline about it, and I was under the impression that the decision was before the drive we're going to go for 2. Now something changed in the meantime, so the hardest part, and we know it, we've had a delay game on a 2-point, is to get everybody back. So I just assumed 2 and looked over and couldn't really tell. It looked like they were holding up 1. I was a little confused because I thought we talked about going for 2.
Yeah. Well, that's something you probably keep to yourself. I don't think you spread that to the media, but it really doesn't matter anymore because it's open season on him. He also said this past week he looks slow. His future with the Jets, who are probably going to have to go through an overhaul here. The defense has some parts. But, just bringing in his hand-picked guys like Devontae Adams, choosing which coach goes and which coach stays and which offensive. I mean, they turn the whole team over to him. And it doesn't look like they can possibly move forward with a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers next year. But he said that he wants to play. Doesn't mean he's going to play in New York. Could he play someplace else? Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network on with Rich Eisen with this speculation as to where Aaron Rodgers will be in 2025.
We went from Aaron Rodgers at the end of his time in Green Bay, kind of on a year-to-year basis, musing about how much longer he wanted to do it. At one point, a couple seasons before he left Green Bay, essentially, letting the Packers know, I don't want to be here. I want to go someplace else, or else I'll just retire. They end up paying him. He wins another MVP. Then things go sideways again. They trade him to the Jets. Then through the process of tearing the Achilles, and of course, when they traded for him, the way they structured the contract, by Rodgers' own words, he was thinking of it as a 2-year proposition. He effectively lost 2023. Then the more he talked, and of course, Rodgers talks a lot publicly, he started talking about 2 years or maybe 3 more years and things like that. So for him, with reporters the other day, when he was asked, has it changed your mind? Do you intend to play? And he said, I think so, yes. That, to me, was a big walk it back moment for Aaron Rodgers. That's probably, it's probably partly a reflection of how Aaron Rodgers is feeling. at a time where, you watched that play the other day after the incompletion, Devontae Adams in the end zone, 4th and goal. Rodgers is scrambling around and gets absolutely blasted and is face down on a bad team, 3-7. And I watched that play and I'm just like, he has to be thinking, what am I doing? Why am I out here? But it's also a function of you don't know what's going to happen with the Jets. First of all, you don't know necessarily who is going to be running that organization atop the coaching search because Donald Trump just won. Woody Johnson was his ambassador to the UK in his first term. Woody, from everything I understand, would certainly like to be a part of a potential administration in some type of post. So it could be his brother Christopher, who's a very sharp, nice, good guy who also, is a different personality than Woody. That could alter the direction that you go in terms of what type of coach you hire and what that process looks like. Does Aaron Rodgers want to stick around if they say, hey, we're bringing in a totally different, we're going to hire some offensive coordinator who runs a totally different system? Does he want to be a part of that? Does he have the same level of input? If not, or if the Jets say, thanks, Aaron, this really didn't work out for 2 years, we're going to let you move on. We're either going to release you or we're going to try to trade you. Does he want to go and try this again at age 41 and find that balance of trying to bring along the young guys and also bring in some of his old guys? Is anybody going to let him do that based on the level of play? There's a lot of ins and outs of this, Rich, and it is one of the biggest stories. Season's not over yet.
Right.
For the Jets, but into the offseason, this is one of the biggest stories in football.
That's Tom Pelissero, actually Friday on the Eisen Show. So they were 3-7 at that point. Now they're 3-8, and it's a dumpster fire there, and it's one that they created themselves. They turned a whole organization over to Aaron Rodgers. You just can't do that. And looking at the NFC standings, AFC, different story. AFC, you got the franchise quarterbacks leading the way. No surprise, right? Buffalo winning yesterday as they were able to take down the Kansas City Chiefs as Josh Allen gets a leg up, at least for now, on Patrick Mahomes. Chiefs, despite losing, they're still there. They got Mahomes, the best in the business. Houston is leading a week South with C.J. Stroud in his second year, cementing himself being one of those guys who are not being paid at that level because he's only in his second year. And then you can look at Russell Wilson too as kind of a rebirth quarterback. That's made a difference there. So you got like three of the aces, three of the elite quarterbacks in the league, in Allen and Mahomes and then with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, although they're going to have an uphill climb, losing yesterday to Pittsburgh is going to be tough. They'll get a rematch with them, and we'll know a lot more. But those are highly paid elite quarterbacks. They're some of the best. In the NFC, Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts, who, early in the season and even last year when they were collapsing, kind of, overlooked. But he's emerged again as one of the best in the league. And then you have Detroit and Minnesota. Detroit and Minnesota are that's the number one and number two. So the two teams at 8-2 are Minnesota and Philadelphia, and the best team in the league is Detroit. And, they don't even have the division locked up because Minnesota's only a game back. They continue to win with Sam Darnold. And if you look at the two quarterbacks, they're both discards. They really are. I mean, they weren't cut, but they were traded, and in the case of Goff, Goff yesterday became only the second quarterback to actually the first quarterback. He set a record to have a perfect passer rating for the second time in his career. He threw for 412 yards and 4 touchdowns against a miserable Jacksonville team. I mean, they're terrible. I understand that. But in 2018, when he was playing for the Rams, he also had a perfect passer rating, threw for 465 yards and 5 touchdowns. Perfect passer rating, by the way, 158.3. The quarterbacks who have had multiple games with 400-plus passing yards and a perfect passer rating, Jared Goff. That's it. So, it's possible that depending on how things shake out in the NFC, and I think Philadelphia is going to be a factor, and maybe even Arizona might get into it. Who knows? But as things are separating out, and depending on what we see from the Commanders as they play Dallas next week, maybe there's a chance they're in the mix of teams. But more than likely, the team that comes out of the NFC East is, at least in my opinion, is going to be either Philadelphia, Detroit, or Minnesota. That's the way it seems to come down to. And remember how Jared Goff got to Detroit, that they wanted, the elite quarterback with the Rams, and they had a guy who, had a good career in Detroit and wanted to get out of there. And so they said, okay, we're gonna trade Matt Stafford. We're gonna give him a chance to win. And he was the missing piece for the Rams, who thought, okay, we got to a Super Bowl with Goff, but he can't get us over the hump. So we need to go out and get a guy who clearly can do it. And Stafford did it. Meantime, Goff, they were supposed to run out his contract and then sunset it, and they got draft picks in return. Well, they looked at Goff and they went, man, maybe he's not too bad. And right now, it looks like you're going to see Stafford home for the playoffs, and you're going to see Jared Goff competing for the Super Bowl. So you never know. I mean, you still want that guy, and I would take Jaden Daniels 100 times out of 100, but sometimes it's not always, like you would expect it to be. And if you watch I watched the end of the Seattle-San Francisco game yesterday, and Brock Purdy because he was not a first-round draft pick, because he was Mr. Irrelevant, he's up for the big money deal after 4 years, not 5. There's no fifth-year option if you're not taken in the first round. So he's going to be in the $60 to $65 million range, and I don't think there's anything they can do about it. But he was out-dueled yesterday, and the one who made the big play at the end was Geno Smith. Geno Smith was the one who scored a touchdown on a run, a lot like what Josh Allen did in cementing the game for Buffalo against Kansas City. And there's another guy, another reclamation project. So you can still do that. I don't think it's a good way to do business. I think they got burned here trying to do it that way for several years. But it's not always the elite guys. It's not always that. And if Sam Darnold figures to be in the mix this year, so be it. If Russell Wilson figures to be in the mix this year, so be it. If Jared Goff is in the mix, and even Seattle's not dead with Geno Smith. I mean, if they lost yesterday, they were probably going to be out of it. But, it's the narrative still is, get yourself one of those guys. And it feels really good that Washington has one of those guys in Jaden Daniels. But as we go on, and maybe this all changes once we get to January, where really the rubber meets the road. But right now, you can get by, as teams are, surprising people without breaking the bank for one of those quarterbacks and being good enough. Now, if Goff, I think right now has one of those contracts, but given what they traded to get and get him, they went beyond expectations with a guy who was seemingly on his way out of the league, or seemingly out of his way as a starter, even though he was the number one pick of the draft, and he had taken the Rams to the Super Bowl. Really crazy how the quarterback go-round goes. All right, coming up, we'll get to more on the Commanders. Tom Pelissero has some thoughts on Jaden Daniels, who may be playing hurt. We'll get to that. Also, a couple of things left over from the Thursday night loss in Philadelphia that I want to get to as well. All that coming up in the next hour. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. 58 years ago today, 31-year-old Sandy Koufax retired. He had just won 27 games. He had helped the Los Angeles Dodgers get to the World Series. He had struck out 300 batters. He was at the top of the game at an age where athletes are in their absolute prime. And he walked away. And there are just a handful of great athletes who have done that. And I'll go over, coming up later this hour, the 58th anniversary of that and the others who would fit into that category of leave us wanting more. The Willie Mays stumbling in the outfield, the Aaron Rodgers at 40 with a team that stinks. No, these guys left you with, wow, what if they had stuck around a little bit longer? We'll get to that and a whole lot more. I want to dive into the Commanders a little bit as they had sort of a bye, right? They played Thursday night, so they were off this weekend. They're back at it today, and look, the rest is badly needed. It really is. I mean, they look like a tired team right now. You got a quarterback who may be hitting the wall. Maybe Cliff Kingsbury's offense has started to be figured out by the defenses. That's been his history, that his teams kind of tail off at the end of the year. So there's a lot to unpack there. But we had something over the weekend, and we carried it on our stream at ESPN630DC.com. Bram Weinstein, who's the voice of the Commanders, also did the play-by-play for the Washington Spirit, which advanced to the NWSL championship game for the second time in 4 years. They won it in 2021. And they won it in a shootout against Gotham, the New York team, on Saturday. And there was a really nice story in the Metro section about the atmosphere there. And I think we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from finding out who the Sports Illustrated Sports Person of the Year is going to be. That used to be a really big deal. I think it still is. Last year it was Deion Sanders, which, is partly related to the fact that they have to make a decision so early. And Colorado got off to a 3-0 start, and people got all geeked up about that, and they won only 4 games for the year, and I thought that was a really poor selection. I think it's going to be Caitlin Clark. I think you have to go that way, and it's not just what she's done for women's basketball. 18 million people watched the women's championship game with Caitlin Clark, and 9 million people watched the men's championship game. And what she has done for the WNBA and elevating that and women's sports as a whole, it's really incredible. I think there were periods of time where we thought it was going to be bigger than it has become over the years. Now, you have to go back 25 years, but when the U.S. women's national team beat, I think it was Japan. They played at the Rose Bowl. They had 90,000 people there. Brandi Chastain took off her jersey after she scored the game-winning goal, and there was a feeling like, okay, women's soccer has really arrived. And it sort of did. They had a league, and you had a team here which featured Mia Hamm, and they played their first game at RFK Stadium, and they had 35,000 people there. But by the end of the year, they were drawing 3,000 and 4,000, and the league folded up. There were a couple of other attempts, but now the NWSL is working, and it's working really well here because they got the right place to play it. Audi Field holds 20,000, and when it's packed, it's an incredible atmosphere, as it was on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. It was a noon kickoff, and they managed to advance. And as the story is written here in the Post, that energy and joy was on full display during Saturday's semifinal against New York. The Southwest Washington Stadium was filled with millennials who showed up in groups, soccer moms and dads and kids and longtime season ticket holders. Fans were a sea of black, encouraged by the team to create a blackout at Audi Field. They were loud. They were ready for more than 90 minutes of heart-pounding action that followed. In the end, they screamed and shed tears of joy as goalkeeper Aubrey Kingsbury saved the final penalty kick to clinch the win in extra time. The team will travel to Kansas City for the championship on Saturday. It's an 8 o'clock game Saturday night. They're going to play Orlando, which knocked off Kansas City yesterday. And, this is an example of where not just soccer is, but where women's sports are. And the WNBA, which has been long a loss leader for the NBA, is now starting to bring in some money, and they're going to have a new collective bargaining agreement, and things are going to change dramatically in terms of the interest and in terms of the money. In this story, they quote Brandon Clark, who's the team's vice president of marketing, and he said one of the things that distinguishes Spirit fans and their investment is in the advancement and promotion of women's sports. It shows throughout the entire league. The NWSL announced this month that it surpassed more than 2 million in attendance across 14 clubs. Of the 10 largest crowds in team history, Clark says, 8 came this season. Saturday's semifinal sold out by Wednesday. A handful of standing room only tickets were snatched up a couple of days later to bring the total attendance to 19,365. When the Spirit began splitting its time at Audi Field in 2021, the team averaged 5,000 fans over 6 matches, according to data provided by the Washington Post. That average rose to almost 14,000 over 13 matches this year. In fact, they used to play some of the games near me in Germantown. There's a Germantown Soccerplex, which holds, I don't know, maybe 1,000, 1,500, something like that. And it's just, I think, an example of the help of Caitlin Clark and others where women's sports sits right now. And as the father of a daughter and a granddaughter who's just learning to play soccer, she's only 2, I think that's a really cool thing. That's really nice. All right, Commanders, they're back at work today, and this has been a lingering issue. Now, Dan Quinn said in his first game back that Jaden Daniels was bothered by the rib injury. He did not look himself in the Chicago game. I was there for that. But he summoned enough to throw that ball close to 65 yards in the air for the Hail Mary pass, so he had something left. Last 2 weeks have been rough. He did not look good, particularly against Pittsburgh, though blowing the lead, not all of his fault. And then he really didn't play well. It was his first game where he really looked like a rookie against Philadelphia last week. So the question is lingering, what's his health? Is he playing hurt? Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network on with Rich Eisen Friday on that.
When you suffer the type of rib injury that he has, it's something that can linger. That's definitely part of it. He's wearing something under his uniform to try to mitigate some of that. I know that he made a comment, I think, to the broadcast team about you might see me grimace when I'm throwing the football. Anytime that the quarterback's motion is being impacted by pain, that's going to certainly, affect the way that your entire offense operates. Looking at that game last night, I don't know how much you attribute to Jaden Daniels not feeling right. He certainly, has gotten hit quite a bit. He was used to getting hit at LSU. He's not taken the totally egregious ones, but those add up. It's a longer season in the NFL. You're getting hit by even bigger, stronger, faster men than you were in college. I think that, when you take a step back and look at Washington and people are going to go, what's going on with the Commanders and, why aren't they winning? I think that you got a little bit of, a small sample size and regression to the mean here. I don't think that, I know that if you ask people around the league, they don't look at the Washington roster as like, boy, this is one of the most talented teams in the NFL. That they won some close games. They won a game on a Hail Mary. The quarterback was covering up a lot in the early stages of the season. Beyond Terry McLaurin, they got some work to do in terms of filling out the skill spots. Certainly defensively, there's still some pieces that, Adam Peters and company over time are going to be wanting to fill in here. They punched above their weight in the early portion of the season. I don't want to say that they're coming back to earth, but this is, probably what they are, which is a good, competitive, well-coached team that is going to be disciplined. They didn't execute on some things, including that 4th and 2 last night. Now here they are on a little bit of a losing skid.
Yeah, 2 games, and I don't think it's time for panic, but that seems to be the case here. Like, oh, yeah, they're really, not that good. Here's really good perspective that came on Thursday night from a couple of veterans. One who has been here for all 6 years of his career and has never had a winning season. That's Terry McLaurin. And the other is Zach Ertz, who comes here after winning a Super Bowl in Philadelphia, played for really good teams there. And he's got not just perspective of being around the league for a long time, but being a part of a winning team and what it takes to get over the hump and win a Super Bowl as he did in Philadelphia, beating Tom Brady and the Patriots. So he's got an understanding of this, and I think his perspective on this is spot on, that when you have a start like this, now remember, going into the season, we're thinking, okay, Jaden Daniels, right pick. Let's see how he develops. Maybe by the end of the year, they win 6-7 games, and you're thinking, okay, he's moving up. He's going to be, and then he's a sensation. And then it's like, oh, man, we've never seen anybody with accuracy like this as a rookie. And forget just the conversation about being Rookie of the Year. How about MVP? And why stop at just playoffs as a goal for the Commanders? When they're playing at 7-2, why do that? And now it's a little bit different. And I think this perspective of Zach Ertz really is worth considering, because what happened in the early part of the season, as he points out here, the expectations were raised way too high. So the way they're playing now is kind of what you expect for a roster that was totally overhauled, not a lot of money spent on it, and a rookie quarterback who's going to take his lumps. So, again, here's Zach Ertz after the loss on Thursday night back in Philadelphia for him.
I mean, when expectations are high, one win or one loss feels like 5. 2 losses feels like 15 in a row. And so it's just part of the thing when your expectations are high for yourself and you're not able to pull it off, you're going to hurt. It's going to sting. And you got to reflect. You got to look in the mirror. These 10 days off are going to be really good for us to look what we've been doing well and what we need to get better at and be able to attack going into the back half of the season, or the back however many games we have left. I don't think anyone is hitting the panic button, but at the same time, we got a lot to improve on to be the football team we want to be at the end of the year. 2 losses isn't going to change our mindset in terms of how we approach and attack this thing, but we do have to get better, and there's a lot of urgency that comes with that.
The decision to go for it on 4-2, what did you make of that? Were you surprised by it at all?
No comment. I have nothing to say. It's, I trust DQ, and they got a lot of information that they go through all the decisions with, and I love that they want to put the ball in our hands as an offense, and we just didn't get it done.
Interesting he first went to no comment, because I think probably he wanted to second-guess that but didn't do that, unlike Aaron Rodgers, who second-guessed his staff for going for 1 rather than 2 on a touchdown. But anyway, I think his perspective is right there, right spot on, that when you raise the expectation at the beginning of the year, I mean, this is a fan base that's been beaten down over 25 years. So you gave them hope, and now, you know, it's sort of been crushed by the 2 losses. But who wouldn't have taken 7-4 through 11 games? Who wouldn't have done that? Also, the Terry McLaurin perspective, and he's always, you know, he's a great leader on this team, has never complained, all the 12 different quarterbacks he's had to go through to finally get to this one. And what you've heard from the players, including McLaurin, throughout the early part of the season when they were having all this success, winning these games, is we got a brotherhood here. We stick together. It's different than anywhere else. Even Nick Allegretti, who won Super Bowls in Kansas City, said he'd never seen an atmosphere like this. Dan Quinn got a lot of credit for getting these guys to play together and work for each other, and they have really done a good job. Well, it's all, you know, sunshine and lollipops when you're 7-2. When you're 7-4, here's a veteran in Terry McLaurin who's seen the worst of times here, who understands kind of the crossroads that they're at in this part of the season.
It's easy to preach brotherhood when everything's going good and when you're winning and having a good time and things like that. So this is when kind of those what your program is built on, this is when it needs to stand out. So, you know, we hang our hat on our brotherhood, and this is definitely the time that we need to stand up for that.
Prevented the offense from getting going today?
You know, that's a good question. I feel like, you know, you got to give them credit. That's a good defense. You know what I mean? That's a really good defense on all 3 levels. So they definitely posed their challenges. I just didn't feel like we executed like we should have. And, you know, when you kind of let teams hang around, I think the defense did a great job. You kind of let teams, like, hang around and you don't capitalize off of the opportunities we had offensively. You know, their offense is going to eventually make plays. So, yeah, I just don't think we executed well today.
Yeah, and Quinn is getting criticism for going all in rather than kick the field goal to go up 13-12. They went for it on 4th and 2 after getting shoved back twice. I mean, they 2nd and inches, they line up in shotgun, they get stopped, and 3rd down, Brian Robinson gets stopped, and then the ridiculous slow-moving play with the there was a snap issue because supposedly Biotish couldn't hear the count from Daniels. I mean, it was just a mess, and it fell apart. And now what he says is, you know, we talk about brotherhood when we're winning. Now the brotherhood is tested. Let's see what happens from here. Now, the way things are setting up, it's a great opportunity for them because Dallas has to play tonight, and they are 7-point underdogs with a team that seems to be on the verge of collapse, if not already collapsed. And then the odds are already out, and we'll see what happens off of tonight and who gets hurt or whatever. But they are also Cowboys are 10-point underdogs coming here on Sunday. So they're considered to be a touchdown worse at home against Houston and 10 points worse in Landover than the Commanders, and that's going to be a 1 o'clock game on Sunday. So we'll find out more over the course of the week. I think the extra rest through the weekend is probably going to help Daniels, but it may be a rib injury that he deals with the rest of the year. And, you know, if it continues to bother him, could they sit him down for a week? You know, this is a team fighting to make the playoffs, and this is why you got Marcus Mariota. And Mariota's already won a game for him against a bad team, no question, in Carolina. But this is why you have him, and if you want him healthy for the stretch run, it might make sense. Now, they got a bye week coming up in 2 weeks, so they play Dallas at home, and then they play Tennessee at home, and then they got a bye. I mean, is it possible? Mariota started his career with Tennessee. If Daniels does not look sharp against the Cowboys, could you sit him down against Tennessee, get him off for 2 weeks, get him healthy, and then you would have, 4 games left to go. So, something to think about, including a game with Dallas, which is a winnable game. And off the bye, they play New Orleans on the road. New Orleans is a bad team, too. So that'll be something to watch as we continue. All right, Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.